So feet on the wall. Okay. Okay, good morning, Pete. Okay, this is the, what is the date today? Today's the 30th of March, 2007. Wow. Okay, now, I'm going on this tour of the civil rights thing, following the path of Martin Luther King, and we're looking at the influences on Martin Luther King, the Jewish influences, the Christian influences, the Muslim influences, the Buddhist influences, anything.
Gandhi's influence.
Gandhi's influence. What do you know about that?
Gandhi was influenced by Henry David Thoreau of New England. This man, King, was an extraordinary scholar. He read so widely, and what the conclusions he came to, I believe, were the conclusions the entire world must come to. We must learn to communicate with each other in spite of our different languages and our different religions, our different ways of dressing, different ways of making love, different ways of eating. We may not approve of each other, but we've got to stop thinking that we can solve our problems by killing each other.
Why was Martin Luther King's approach so different than what was before?
Well, when great injustice has been done, it often makes you so angry. He said the best thing to do is kill those people. The world would be better off if those people were not here. And in a sense, you and I, no matter where we came from, if you go back thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, we're all descended from good killers. The ones who were not good killers didn't have descendants. On the other hand, they lived very cooperatively. I have often joked that I first became a communist when I read about the American Indians. Within their tribe, there was no such thing as rich or poor. If there was food, everybody ate. If there was hunger, everybody was hungry. Even the chief and the chief's wife and children, they were hungry.
Plus nobody owned land either.
That's right. And later on in life, I thought that socialism would solve all the world's problems. Well, obviously it didn't. And King, in 1955, really turned my life around and gave me a new definition of God, a new definition of progress. And I've quoted many, many times what he said. The weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral. With violence, you can murder the hater, but you do not get rid of hate, you just increase hate. He said, darkness cannot drive out darkness. It takes light to do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. It takes love, and I would add respect. Because often the same word means somewhat different things to different people.
What happened in 1955?
Well, I think everybody knows. This woman, I think she was 39 or 41 years old, had been thinking for many years, how do we get rid of Jim Crow and segregation in the South? You see, the Civil War ended with the federal troops withdrawn from the South, and the Ku Klux Klan took over, and the courts said that a separate was the law of the day. There was a drinking fountain for white people, and if you were even just a little bit African, you had another drinking fountain. And if you wanted to go to the toilet, there was a toilet for white people and a toilet for colored and so on. And I didn't realize this. I was raised in New England, and until I toured with a black performer, found I couldn't go to the average restaurant. We couldn't go. And sometimes if there was a restaurant she could go to, I could not go there. It was ridiculous. Well, King, later on in his life, said the most important speech he made was right at the beginning of the bus boycott. Rosa Parks sat her down in the bus on Friday, and her friend E.D. Nixon, who was also in the NAACP with Rosa, he bailed her out, and he was a member of this. He was a Pullman car porter, the only black union, and he called up his union leader, A. Philip Randolph, and gets his advice. And Randolph said, get a middle-class church to meet him, because it will be the middle-class black people who will get scared first. They'll lose their business, the doctors and lawyers, and make sure they are behind you. And there were 200 people came to the meeting on Saturday night and decided to have a bus boycott. The newspapers were so foolish as to print the news of it in the Sunday paper. And all of Montgomery read this news. Most of the white people laughed, ha ha, the bus boycott will last for 2 hours. But on Sunday night, there were 2,000 people. They couldn't all get in the church. They stood outside with loudspeakers. And King said this was his most important speech. He says, we are going to win this bus boycott if we are nonviolent. And somehow he kept it nonviolent for 13 months.
So he had already been influenced by Gandhi by that time?
Oh yes. He had gone to Morehouse College for 4 years in Atlanta, but then he did 3 years in divinity school up in Pennsylvania. And then he admired 2 philosophy professors in Boston University, and he went there for 2 more years. Now his own academic reputation had spread, and he was offered 3 good jobs in the philosophy department of 3 separate northern universities. He turned all 3 down for a lower paying job down in Montgomery, Alabama, because he knew that was where the struggle had to be made, and the people who had to conduct that struggle. This struggle was not going to be won by northern liberals. It was going to be won by masses of African Americans in the South. And he knew he was going to be killed. Someone once asked...
when did you know that?
Well, there were several attempts and threats right during the bus boycott. They tried to bomb it. In fact, they did bomb his house. He had moved his bed just shortly before to a different corner of the room, and the other corner was one that was blown up. Well, someone asked him, Dr. King, if a movie is made about your life, how should it end? He said, with my death. And you know, one of his best speeches, I'm making copies of it to hand out. I'm sorry I didn't bring it today. A demented woman, a black woman, but who was out of her mind, came up to him in Harlem when he was in New York. And he was busy signing autographs, and he heard a voice saying, are you Dr. Martin Luther King? And he said, yes. Next thing you know, he felt something in his chest. She'd stabbed him with a knife or something.
It was October 1958.
That is. Just 3 years after the bus boycott.
The next day, you know, he was supposed to have been in Washington.
Now,
at a demonstration.
They put him in an ambulance, took him to a hospital, and they carefully pulled the knife out. They said that knife was only a 1/4 inch from your main artery in your heart. If you had sneezed, you would have been dead. But with this wonderful speech, he said, if I had sneezed, I wouldn't be here today to speak to you. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have lived to see that. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have lived to see that. And this was about 5 years later. And he counted off the good things that had happened in Birmingham, in Selma, and so on. If I had sneezed, I would not have been there.
You mentioned to me the other day something about Rosa Parks, that she had been involved with the Highlander Folk School.
This is interesting. In the mountains of Tennessee was a poor family, and the only school they had was a little one-room schoolhouse, not very good education. But they found themselves with a very bright son. I don't know how old he was when they decided to move down to a town where he could get a better schooling. Their name was Horton, and this boy was Miles Horton, M-Y-L-E-S. They went down and got a job in a factory, probably just enough money to get by, but their son got high marks, and he did get a scholarship to a college. I don't know which college it was, somewhere in Chicago or New York. And someone once asked him, what are you going to do with your life? He said, I want to start a school back in the mountains where my parents came from, so they can get better schooling. Well, they did. Do you have any money? He said, no, I don't have a dime. He said, go to Scandinavia. Way back in 1820, Bishop Grundtvig started, he was a Christian socialist. He started what he called the folk school. The word folk means people in the Scandinavian, Norwegian, or Denmark. And Grundtvig said, if you can read, and if there's a library where you can get a book, you can learn almost anything. But don't do it all by yourself. You need a group. 3 or 4 is too small. On the other hand, 10 or 15 is too big. The right size is about 7 or 8 people. No more, no less. And each week, one member of the group reads one chapter, and the others ask questions the next week. And he has to, or she has to answer the questions. And the next week, another person reads the next chapter, and now all the others ask questions. At the end of the year, everybody gets experience in making reports, reading something, and how to make a report, and how to answer questions. And you also get experience in how to ask the right question. You know, Einstein says the big problem in this world is to find the right question to ask. And Miles went to Denmark, stayed there a year, studying the folk school movement and the different way it works. He came back, and there was somebody up in the mountains of Tennessee who had an old farmhouse. Maybe the people had died and they didn't know what to do with it. Couldn't sell it, so he got an old farmhouse. Now he was married. There were some disagreements. One man who worked with him was a very strong socialist and felt that they called themselves the Highlander Folk School because they're in the mountains, the highlands.
Okay.
But Miles Horton said, no, we can be independent. We can welcome anybody, whether they're Republican or Democrat or independent or socialist or anti-socialist, but we should work with everybody. So there was a disagreements right in the beginning, but in 1955, this seamstress in Montgomery was doing some work for a liberal white woman. I knew her. She's a wonderful person. Her husband had once been head of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, but he was too good a man, and Truman did not reappoint him. Virginia Durr was her name, and Clifford Durr was her husband, a liberal Southern white man. Virginia said, Rosa, I think you would like to go to a place called Highlander Folk School.
Was Rosa domestic for her?
Look, she was sewing some curtains. She was a seamstress.
She was a seamstress.
I think she was sewing some curtains for Virginia. And Virginia said, I'll pay the money. And Rosa got on a bus and went up there to Highland. It was about 150 miles away, I think, in southern Tennessee, and might have been 200 miles, or even more. And after 2 weeks, the seminar was over. Miles went around the circle. What are you going to do when you get home?
What was the topic of the seminar?
Oh,
Do you know who else was there?
How are we going to get freedom in the South?
Do you know anyone else who was there at that seminar?
No, I don't.
Okay.
People who study this, they know who was there. But after the seminar was over, Miles said, what are you going to do when you get home to put into practice what you have learned here? And one woman said, well, I'm going to start voter registration. And a man said, well, I got to start before that. I have to start with literacy classes. Some of my people can't read or write. And they came to Rosa, and she said, I don't really know what I'm going to do. They said, well, you must think of something. We'll get back to you. And a few minutes later, they said, what will you do when you get back? She says, I really don't know what I'm going to do, but I am going to do something. And I think it was about a month later when she sat down on the bus, maybe a couple of months later. And of course, she might say it was an accident, might say it was God's design, whatever it was, that Dr. Martin Luther King had just come to Montgomery that same year.
Wow.
And so a coincidence. Maybe some of the great things in the world are a coincidence.
Right.
So whatever you want to, whatever you want to call it. And I remember reading in the New York Times a little 3-inch piece on the back page that in Montgomery they're having a bus boycott.
That's the way it started.
And they had songs. So I called up the New York Times and said, what's the address of this Montgomery Improvement Association? And I got the address and said, dear friends, I'm a singer. I'd like to know some of the songs you're singing. And I got a nice letter in reply with some mimeographed song sheets. We are moving on to victory. We're moving on to victory. We're moving on to victory, and we know the time ain't long. We know love is the watchword. We know love is the watchword. We know love is the watchword for peace and dignity. We are moving on to victory. It uses the tune of an old gospel song. She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. I've heard dozens of different words to this melody. And he said, thank you for your contribution. I think I sent him a $25 check, something like that. And
now, at that time, had you heard of Martin Luther King? I guess you hadn't.
Well,
nobody heard of him by then, right?
No.
Yeah.
But during the next few months, I found out more. 2 years later, almost, not quite, in August 1957, Highlander was having its 25th anniversary. Wow. Miles Horton and his wife had started it in 1932.
Wow.
And he wrote me a letter. He says his wife had died a couple years earlier. She'd swallowed some poison when she was cleaning the house. And she was a good singer, very good singer. And she was the one who had learned the song We Shall Overcome. They sang it very, very slowly.
Where did it come from?
It was a gospel song, and it's still sung sometimes, but fast. It was sung. It's usually so-called, I'll be all right, I'll be all right, I'll be all right. I'll be all right someday. And in 1909, there was a strike in, I think, Birmingham, and there was a letter. I've seen a copy of the letter on the front page of the United Mine Workers Union newspaper. And it said, at our strike meetings, we always opened with a prayer and singing that good old song, We Will Overcome.
Oh.
In other words, it became a union song over 100 years ago.
Wow, 1919 you said?
1909.
09, right, okay.
Now there is a song called I'll Overcome Someday, written by a preacher named Tindley in Philadelphia. But it's a very different kind of song. But I'll Be All Right is still sung. The second verse, I'll be like him, I'll be like him, or I'll wear the crown. And a verse, I have overcome, I have overcome. And it was very common to make union songs out of old gospel songs.
Right.
Like, we shall not be moved. That's a famous union song. But it came from an older song. Jesus is my captain, I shall not be moved. Jesus is my captain, I shall not. But now it's the union is behind us, we shall not be moved. Well, in 1946, a woman named Lucille Simmons was one of 300 black women in Charleston, South Carolina, on strike. And it was in the winter, and they'd have maybe a little bonfire inside an iron barrel to keep their hands warm while they're on the picket line. And they'd see, oh, here comes Lucille. Now we'll hear that song sung slower than anybody ever heard it. And she liked to sing it what they call long meter style. Where's the basses? Where's the tenors? We'll overcome. And people who know how to harmonize get rich chords. And she sang, it would take over a minute to sing one verse.
Would it be the same words as they have today?
Not exactly. She sang we will overcome. And she might have said that the Lord is behind us. The Lord will see us through. Well, Sylvia Horton up in the Highlander School, miles away, 300 miles away from Charleston, South Carolina, she got involved in helping the strikers, and she learns this song, and it was her favorite song. In 1947, she is up in New York raising money. Every year she had to come north to raise money for Highlander, and actually she went out to California. That's where a friend of mine, Guy Carawan, learned it. And she taught it to me. I published in our little song magazine in New York as We Will Overcome.
And what year was that?
That was in 1947.
Okay.
However, nobody picked it up. I tried playing it with a banjo. We will overcome. Chicka, 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 chicka. Nobody picked it up. However, Guy Carawan and his friend Frank Hamilton in California had been learning gospel songs from a black church, and they liked a different rhythm for some of their slow songs. It's still 1, 2, 3, 4, but every beat is divided in 3 small beats. And they taught it to me this way with my guitar, not a banjo. I go pop, 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 pop. Musicians call it 12/8 time. And it's very rhythmic, but slow. Well, Guy Carawan had come to work at Highlander. Miles said, we need more music around here, and Sophia is no longer alive. And Guy came to lead music. And in 1960, he had a workshop, we called it, called Singing in the Movement. And young people came from Alabama and Mississippi and from Florida and from Virginia. And Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they were singing all day long. And Guy taught them "We Shall Overcome." It was the hit song of the weekend.
Really?
Well, 2 months later, Guy is in Raleigh, North Carolina for the founding convention of SNCC. You know what SNCC was?
Oh yeah, I was head of SNCC at Antioch. Yeah.
Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, SNCC for short.
I went to one of the organizing conventions in Washington and also Atlanta.
Well, in Raleigh, North Carolina, in April 1960, somebody shouted out, "Guy, teach us all, we shall overcome." And that's when they invented the way of crossing your hands in front of you, and your left hand holds the right hand of the person at your right, and your right hand holds the left hand of the person at your left, and your shoulders touch as you sway back and forth. And that way of singing it was carried all through the South. A month later, it was not a song, it was the song. And I added some verses. I'm quite proud that a lot of people sing the verses I added. "We'll walk hand in hand."
Right, yeah.
And "the whole wide world around."
Yeah, you got it down.
But no two people sing exactly the same verses.
Right.
"The Lord will see us through. We shall all be free." Well, to get back to where I was, I now believe that if there is a human race here, the whole world will have learned these principles of nonviolent confrontation and being willing to talk with people that you disagree with. Maybe you disagree on some things, but there's other things you do agree on. Now, for example, I did not agree with President Reagan. A lot of people who see this may feel President Reagan was the best president we ever had. However, I have to say that he appointed a very conservative Republican to be the Surgeon General. His name was Everett Koop.
Oh yeah.
K-O-O-P. He's still alive. His wife just died, though. I want to write him a letter. Surgeon General Koop decided that he would concentrate on one thing: persuading America to stop smoking. Smoking kills millions of people. And if we don't start smoking, it'll be easier to stop it. And if we quit advertising so much, well, by gosh, the tobacco industry didn't know what to do. Koop was traveling all around with his fancy uniform of Surgeon General and having meetings here and meetings there with doctors, and all the doctors agreed. Smoking causes cancer.
Well, did he get into the whole issue of secondary smoke, that making people?
That's right.
When did he do that, or in what year?
I don't know exactly. But thanks to Koop, we all called him just plain Koop. Thanks to Koop, 99% of America has kicked the cigarette habit. There are a few people who still smoke. I know it's going to kill me, but still I enjoy it. Now the problem is the rest of the world might live.
A lot of teenagers still picking up on it. The advertising industry is so, slanted toward teenage kids. Yeah. When Martin Luther King got, well, first of all, did you ever have anything to do? Did you ever meet Malcolm X?
Never met him.
What do you think of him?
Well, he was certainly a brave man and basically a very, very honest man. But I do disagree with him in some ways. I think that the moment we depend upon guns, in the long run, we are going to lose. Maybe in the short run, you can gain a victory, but in the long run, we lose. And what is called a gun is different now. It used to be A simple bullet could wound you. But now they have bullets that can blow up a whole house. Someone can buy a special rifle with a telescopic sight and aim it at a house 3 miles away. Boom, the whole house blows up. That kind of thing. So that I strongly disagree with Malcolm in some ways, but I'm fascinated with the book about him. That was a great book.
By Alex Haley?
By Alex Haley.
Yeah.
Haley was a good writer. He wrote that great book called Roots.
Oh, yeah.
Great book. And I learned a lot from that book, and I read his autobiography of Malcolm X. But I believed the King was right, that you don't threaten people with violence. You do insist on your right to speak. You do insist on your right to protest. You do insist that sooner or later we will find ways to communicate. And that is the hope of the future. I tell people, technology will save us if it doesn't wipe us out first. I mean it. New technology, the internet, the web, international web, www.
Yeah. What kind of relationships did you have with King at all?
I only met him once. He came up to Highlander with Rosa and with his friend Ralph Abernathy. They drove up in 1957 for Highlander's 25th anniversary. And Miles called me up and said, "Pete, won't you come down and sing a few songs?" And I sang "We Shall Overcome" then. A friend drove King up to a speaking engagement next day in Kentucky, and she remembers him in the back seat saying, "We shall overcome." That song really sticks with you.
But they didn't really pick it up then until...
He was not a song leader.
Right.
And it wasn't picked up then. I met King one other time in front of the United Nations in New York. 100,000 people protesting the Vietnam War. I sang a couple songs. I was up on the speaker's platform when I see a black car moving inch by inch through the crowd. And I heard people saying, "He's here, he's here." Finally, it gets up within 20 feet of the speaker's platform, and he got out, but it took 6 strong men to push the crowd away so he could get 20 feet. How can anybody live with that kind of adulation?
Yeah.
And it was, in a sense, he was prisoners of his fame. But there, the speech he gave, I'll never forget, because that's when he said, "I have to confess that my own country is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world." And he called for an end to the war in Vietnam.
Is that before his speech at Riverside or after?
I think it was right after it, the day after.
Okay, because he was really coming out against it.
And of course, this is where President Johnson got furious. He says, "After all I did for him, look what he's doing to me. I gotta win this war. I don't want to be the first president that ever lost a war." And he probably, I'm just joking, guessing, he probably said to J. Edgar Hoover, says, "Do what you want." J. Edgar Hoover was a strange character.
That's putting it mildly.
Here's a story about J. Edgar.
Can you imagine how big his file must have been on you?
What?
Can you imagine how big the file was on you?
Oh, sure. In the middle of the 30s, Franklin Roosevelt appointed a liberal Catholic governor of Michigan to be Attorney General. And when Governor Murphy packed up his office to go to Washington, he said to his secretary, "You know, the first thing I'll do when I get to Washington is fire J. Edgar Hoover." But 6 months later, he was back in Detroit, his former secretary says, Governor Murphy, how come Hoover is still on the job? Oh, he said, you don't understand. That man has something on everybody. He blackmailed every single politician in Washington. He got the dirt, as they say. Roosevelt had a girlfriend in Georgia, and every senator and every congressman, he could find out something on them they didn't want known. He had something on everybody. So he stayed Attorney General, no, he said head of the FBI for over 60 years. He was appointed by Harding around 1921 and didn't retire till, I think, 83, something like that. Oh, man.
Did the FBI ever give you a hard time? Did you ever have a hard time with the FBI?
Well, I assume that they tap them out.
Are you on a blacklist, probably, Brandon?
Oh, yes, I was on the blacklist. That's what, I didn't get a job on television for about 17 years.
Wow. That was after the hearings, the McCarthy hearings?
Or even before that. It wasn't McCarthy. I was on the House. I was questioned by the Walters Committee. McCarthy was a senator.
Okay.
I was questioned by the House Un-American Activities Committee.
It was like 51 or something like that?
55.
55?
Well, that was small potatoes. They were questioning famous people.
Wow.
However, in 1950, I and a group called the Weavers had a hit record. Irene, good night. It was up at the top of the hit parade for 3 months. And then they probably said, where'd those people come from? And they got the Weavers blacklisted.
What was so bad about the song, Irene? Was that a communist song?
Well, before we had sung that, we had sung for lefties, of one sort or another.
Yeah.
I had sung on the same stage with Paul Robeson.
Oh, yeah.
In Peekskill, had stones thrown at us.
Oh, yeah. You want to say anything about the Peekskill affair? Or the two affairs?
Well, it's no fun to have stones thrown.
No.
We had 2 little babies in the car. My wife's father pushed them on the floor of the car and put his body on top. Glass flying everywhere. I kept my eyes as high as I could, and glass went down here, but it didn't got in my eye. There was a policeman standing only about 50 feet from a man throwing stones at every car that came down the road. We all had to go down one road. And there's first a pile of stones here, and then a pile of stones there, and then a pile of stones on the other side, on both sides of the road. And I stopped the car in front of the policeman, next to the policeman, tried to roll the window down, but it was so splintered by glass, stones, that I only got it 1 inch down. But I shouted, "Officer, aren't you going to do something?" There's this man throwing stones, and the policeman just standing there, looking at him. The officer, all he did was, "Move on, move on." In other words, he knew all about it. The attack, I found out later, the attack was organized by members of the Ku Klux Klan, who had members in the police force and members in the American Legion and so on.
Somebody told me one time that the Ku Klux Klan, like over in Orange County, about 10 or 15 years ago, was the largest Ku Klux Klan in the United States, right over here. Have you ever seen any activity or heard anything about the Ku Klux Klan in the North?
Well, most of them are grumbling in their beer now.
Yeah.
They can't get away with lynching like they used to. And they have influence. I was going to sing in a local prison, and the head of the prison is from a little town called Nelsonville, only 3 miles from where I live. And they have an organization of the Klan in Nelsonville.
They still do, you think?
I don't know how strong an organization. They're probably a bunch of old people grumbling in their beer.
Wow.
Oh, the world is going to hell.
Well, that whole area, Cold Spring along there, they always have a reputation that black people are afraid to drive along there because of being stopped by the cops.
Well, until recently, if a black family had moved into Cold Spring, the house would have been burned down. But Cold Spring has changed too.
Oh yeah, that's right. Much different.
City people.
I'm wondering, back in the mid-'60s, when the rise of the Black Power movement, the Stokely Carmichael and the Black Panthers, and then when they more or less kicked white people out of the civil rights movement in the South, what was your reaction to that, when the Black Power movement?
There's a time for this and a time for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure that particular time, that particular place, it's very probable that Stokely was right, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that here in the North, I am eager to find organizations where white and black can get used to working together, whether it's the NAACP or a little organization to clean up the Hudson River. My grandson, one of my grandsons, is partly African American, and he's Kitama. His father is 1/4 Chinese, but his mother, my granddaughter, is 1/4 Japanese. And Kitama, if somebody says, "What are you now? Are you black or white?" I says, "Well, you tell me. I'm a quarter Asian. I'm a little more than a quarter African, but my father is also part Native American. And my mother is part German, part Irish, part Dutch, part English." You can laugh about it now. And whenever I sing anywhere, I try and include some humorous songs as well as some serious songs. English is the most widely used language in the history of the planet. 1 out of every 7 human beings can speak or read it. It has the largest vocabulary, perhaps 2 million words, but face it, English is crazy. Just a few examples. There's no egg in eggplant, no pine or apple in pineapple. A writer writes, but do fingers fing? Do grocers gross? Quicksand works slowly. Boxing rings a square. English is crazy. I get the whole crowd singing.
It's some more to it.
Oh, in what language do you drive on a parkway and park in a driveway? Recite at a play and play at a recital. Ship by truck, send cargo by ship. Have noses that run and feet that smell. Sing it. English is crazy. And it ends with, and if a vegetarian eats vegetables, what does a humanitarian eat? Well, if we can learn to laugh with each other, that's, maybe there will be a human race here. Yes, we can laugh with each other and sometimes cry with each other. And let's hope we can learn with each other. Many things we need to learn. Scientists need to learn. Don't invent any more dangerous weapons until we have learned how to cure insane people. My brother is a lifelong teacher. He's now 93. He taught in schools and he taught in summer camps. And sometimes he get the same boy in school as he had in the summer camp. And he said to me, he said, "Peter, I think I can cure any bully if I have about 11 years. Can't do it just by reading, just by talking, not by just looking at pictures. You have to experience something. And when you experience what real joy is of working together and working to help people instead of to hit people. If scientists can figure how to cure bullies and insane people, that's the job they should do. Quit inventing new weapons."
Okay. Well, one little bit oversight. Do you think that from your view of things in history, I think better or worse now in race and ethnic relations in this country. I mean, some areas they say the gap is wider. There are so many poor people. The gap, the education is really horrible in some of the schools. I mean, even here in Beacon or in Dutchess County, the attrition rate for black males is 92% at Dutchess Community College. 92% of the black males who go there fail. That's in Dutchess County, which is supposed to be pretty good. So what's going on in the country? I mean, of course we have some black people who are running for president, So we got the extremes.
Well, there's advantages and disadvantages from learning out of books. My neighbor is a retired school teacher, but he taught what they call special ed. The kids in his high school were failing mathematics. They were failing English. They were failing history. But he says, kids, let me teach you how to fix a car. You can tell by listening. You say, what part of the car is going wrong? You can tell by smelling what part of the car is going wrong. All those people that get high marks in English and history, they're going to bring their cars to you to fix their cars because they don't know how to fix cars. And so I think when we speak of education, we should think of education in the broadest sense. Music may save this world. Cooking may save this world. You know, in our clubhouse at the riverfront, we always start with a song. And we also start with what we call a potluck supper with food. And you might consider, yes, I think after the American Civil War, President Rutherford B. Hayes counted too much on education out of books. What they should have taken, black and white working people, and set them repairing the roads, rebuilding the railroads, rebuilding the courthouse, putting the South back on its feet economically. And the black and white working people working together would get to appreciate, oh boy, he knows how to plaster a wall. Or he knows how to dig a hole right. And they get to appreciate each other, working side by side.
So in other words, are you hopeful about the future of this country?
I'm more hopeful than I was. After Hiroshima, I was pretty pessimistic. I thought within 2 or 3 decades, somebody would drop one of those bombs, and then others would be dropped, and if we weren't killed, we'd be poisoned by the fallout. But President Eisenhower's people would not let General Curtis LeMay start World War III. He tried to. In 1954, he was what we call playing chicken with the Russians. He'd fly 50 planes right at the border, and he'd have a camera on the border. If one Russian plane had crossed that border to meet them, he would have kept on going and wiped out the whole Soviet Union.
What year was
But the Russians were smart. They did not. They said, no, unless they cross the border, we cannot cross the border first.
What year was this, around?
54.
54.
Well, when the American planes get, just before they reach the border, they swoop up in the air and go home. We call it playing chicken.
This was who was president then?
General Eisenhower. Eisenhower was president, and his people said to General Curtis LeMay, he was in charge of what was called the Strategic Command of the Air Force. And they said, don't do this anymore. During the Bay of Pigs, when Kennedy was president, LeMay had 100 planes in the air with hydrogen bombs on them. And he had messages to all the pilots. Communication with Washington may be cut off. If it is, take your orders directly from me. When Kennedy's people found he had done that, they said, don't do that again. That was 62. In 72, he was resigned from the army, retired, and ran for president, well, for vice president, with George Wallace of Alabama. Well, fortunately, they did not get elected. When he died in 1990, he was still grumbling, we would have been better off if we'd had World War III in 1954. Some Frenchmen got off the definition of an expert. An expert is somebody who avoids all the little mistakes on the way to the big fallacy.
Did you ever think that you'd see a black man being seriously considered for president like Obama? What do you think about that?
Well, it's very exciting.
Yeah.
The big problem of any politician is how to get many different groups of people willing to work together. And some are so disgusted with politics they don't bother to vote. Within the last 50 years, fewer and fewer people vote. However, this next election, I think there's going to be more people voting. I don't know for sure, but I think so. And it might be a woman, might be a black man.
You think Obama has a chance?
Oh yeah, he's a brilliant man.
Have you seen his books?
And I haven't read his book, but
I read both of them intact.
Really?
Very good.
And because he has a very good record as a legislator in Illinois. And now he's a senator in Washington from Illinois. But the people who worked with him in Illinois says, no, you can talk with this man. You can argue with this man. You can't take for granted that he's with you or against you. You have to talk with him. And that's what politics is all about.
You had some relation with Clinton, didn't you? Did he the one that gave you the Freedom Award or what?
Oh, I shook his hand and he gave me an award, but that was silly.
Yeah.
When you get old, people keep giving you awards. I should have turned it down.
Which award was that?
They called it the National Endowment for the Arts. And later on, the Kennedy Center gave me an award.
Okay.
But when Clinton turned down Lonnie Guinier to be head of the Civil Rights Commission, I was shouting obscenities around my house. That was the best chance to show America that we can have what is called in Europe proportional representation.
Why did he turn it down?
He claims that there were too many politicians against it.
Why were they against it?
I don't know why. But whatever the reason was, I think he was wrong. I think it would have been better to leave the White House early. But in some ways, I think the Mexicans have an idea for no president could succeed himself.
Only one term?
Yeah, one term.
Right.
But everybody's trying to make that second term, and Roosevelt, of course, tried to get 4 terms.
Speaking of Roosevelt, did you know or meet Eleanor ever?
I've just met her to shake hands. My father was once put together a folk music evening at the White House and met them both. But my father was an old musicologist, scholar, and he made many mistakes in his life too. All of us have made mistakes. And I think one of the main mistakes we made was just being too cocksure. I don't know whether there's going to be a human race here in 100 years, but I tell it a little story, and we can end this interview with this story. Imagine a big seesaw, and one end is on the ground because it's got a big basket full of big rocks. The other end of the seesaw is up in the air. It's got another big basket, but it's only 1/4 full of sand. And some of us have got little teaspoons. We're trying to put more sand in that basket. Most people are kind of laughing at us. They said, don't you know it's leaking out of the basket as fast as you're putting it in? People like you have been trying for thousands of years. But we say we're getting more people with teaspoons all the time. And we claim that pretty soon that basket is going to be half full. And that whole seesaw will go the other direction. And people will say, gee, how did it happen so suddenly? Us and all our little teaspoons. Because it is still leaking out. We have to keep using the teaspoons even after the basket is on the ground. Keep putting sand in, because it is leaking. We got real problems, this human race has. And they're not going to go away all by themselves. Millions, billions of human beings got to realize that every one of us is needed. Every single one of us.